We're back. It's Overwatch League, and we have our first big, big news of the off season. And this is probably the number one thing that I was looking at going into the off season, saying, all right, what's going to happen here? What's the situation? And it is with Fissure and the LA Gladiators and the Seoul Dynasty. So, as you might remember, after stage one, the Gladiators were sitting in 8th place. They traded for Fissure, who was a bench player for the London Spitfire. And he is, of course, an insanely good player. He's a main tank. Winston, Reinhardt, and the like. Now Hammond and Orisa. So he came over to the Gladiators, and he showed that he's probably the best Winston in the league. Definitely up there. One of the best Reinhardts in the league as well. And he kind of pulled the Gladiators from the brink. They really pulled it together, made the playoffs, before eventually losing to the eventual champions, London Spitfire. So, but in their first round matchup versus the Spitfire, you might remember that Fissure got benched, and there were conflicting reports about what happened. We still don't know 100% what happened, but it seemed like it was Fissure was causing some problems because he didn't think the team was practicing enough or hard enough or taking it seriously enough. And there's also the report came out that he wanted to play for a full Korean roster. Of course, the Gladiators not fully Korean. Of their main starters, you have Bishu, who is fluent in both Korean and English. So for him, it can go either way. They have Surefour, who is Canadian, speaks English. Then you have Shaz and Big Goose, who are Finnish. They speak English. On the supports, and you generally had Hydration, who is dual citizenship in the US and Brazil, and he can speak English and Brazil fluently. So, or Portuguese, I should say, he can speak. So, not many Koreans there. They did bring in Void later on, who is just like Bishu, he's an off tank playing Zarya, Diva, and the like. He was Fissure's previous teammate, so there was bringing in one Korean there. Him and Bishu then swapped time for basically stage 4 and the playoffs. And then they also had Asher, a mainly Tracer player. He also played some Widow and some McCree. He played more for the Gladiators the first 1, 2, a little bit in the third stage as well, but then he did not play, wasn't even on the active roster for pretty much all stage 4, and I think it's back half of stage 3. And for the playoffs. So that'd be another Korean speaker, but like I said, his playtime wasn't there. The other person that played was Silk Thread. He was another DPS that they'd sub in sometimes for a variety of heroes, like Junkrat sometimes, Genji, Sombra, people like that. But he didn't play a whole lot, and I believe he only speaks English. I know he at least speaks English. He may or may not know some Korean. But I don't think he's even Korean. I think he's part Chinese and part American. But anyway, not a full Korean player who grew up in Korea and all of that. So not a lot of Korean players on the Gladiators. They're kind of like a mixing pot of players, but they mostly, unless they're revamping their team, which I don't think they are, especially with this trade, they're not a team that is really suited to go all Koreans unless you're shipping out both your supports, you're shipping out Surefour, shipping out Hydration, which it would make no sense for them to do that because they did have a lot of success. So Fissure, he's moving on. He wanted to be traded. The Gladiators respected his wishes, and they sent him to the Seoul Dynasty. So the Dynasty are a team that a lot of people would probably say that their weakness this year, their number one weakness, was the main tank role. And well, they took care of that weakness with this. They bring in Fissure. They have an all-Korean roster, and this makes them very scary, very scary. So, I mean, when you bring him in and you look at some of the pieces they still have with Munchkin, you got Wakid, you got Fleta, of course, guys like Zephyr, Zumba, Jaehong. So, it's a scary team now. They definitely got a lot better with this addition. The deals, or the exact details of the deal haven't come out yet, I'm not sure exactly what they are. I believe it's just like a transfer of money. Soul gave Gladiators a lot of money, so then Gladiators transferred his rights to the Soul Dynasty. And Fissure was very happy about it. He went on a stream yesterday, I believe, and he was talking about it a bunch. He was very thankful for the Gladiators. He said they handled it well. They told him all the offers that they received for him and let him choose, and he picked the Dynasty. Probably because, I mean, if you think about it, for Korean players, since Dynasty is the only team in Korea as of right now, there are rumors that Busan might be getting a team, but they are the only team that's actually in Korea. Obviously, there are lots of Korean rosters, but they're the only ones, so it has a huge appeal, especially because they have such a huge fan base. It has a huge appeal for Korean players. It's like growing up in New York and you want to play for the Yankees when you grow up. As an example, or you grow up in Dallas and you want to play for the Cowboys. Whatever the case may be. It's that kind of situation. So, for me, I'm going to talk about like what it means for the league, what it means for each team involved, what it means for Fissure, what it means for me. Speaking as a Gladiator fan, it makes me sad because obviously Fissure was an insanely good player for us. But also I can understand why there's always been a little bit of like tension. Like when Fissure showed up, he was kind of knocking a lot of the players for their practice habits and the like. So it wasn't a match made in heaven by any means, but they did make it work very well. So I mean, I'll forever be grateful to Fissure because he made the Gladiators extremely fun to watch. But I also think that because of what he did and because of how the team matured over the course of the season, as long as they can find another good main tank that can mesh well with the team for next season, I think that they can still be very, very good. And then obviously for Seoul, after having a good first couple stages, they really fell off in the latter half of the season. But I think this definitely puts them back in the top 6. They finished 8th. I think in my eyes, this doesn't put them as the favorite. I still like London more. I still like New York more. And I think they're still on par with teams like the Fusion and the Gladiators and the Valiant and even like the Fuel. I'd say it probably puts them like ahead of Houston, probably puts them ahead of San Fran for now. I think they're better than Boston now. But what people need to remember, a lot of people, I've been seeing like some reactions to this. A lot of people think Seoul's like they're gonna win now. They're gonna win Overwatch League Season 2, and I think you gotta pump the brakes a little bit for that because, for me, the Dynasty, their lack of a good main tank was not their. It was probably their biggest issue, but it was certainly not their only one. Especially in like the middle stages, they had a lot of issues with losing their support line. They did not protect their back line very well at all. Whether it was Gambler or Toby, they were getting picked off a lot. And of course, we'll have to see going into this will be a huge determinant. But when we get a lot closer to Season 2 of Overwatch League, we'll have to see what the meta is. Because if Mercy's out of meta, if Ana is more meta, then that's a big boost for Dynasty. Because as long as Jaehong stays, I don't think he's going to retire. I don't think he wants to go off on that note. So I think he's going to stay for at least one more year. If Ana is a lot more meta, then he's one of the best in the world, if not the best. So that would be a huge boost. If they don't have to play Mercy, that will make Seoul better immediately. But Fissure still needs to acclimate to the team. He still needs to get that chemistry down with Zunba or Zephyr, whoever they decide to use on the off tank. I think that Zunba had kind of a disappointing year as well. So there still is the fit. They still need to mesh. And I also think that a lot of times when Fleta was struggling, the team struggled. And maybe Fissure will alleviate some of that because he can make plays. But that was the thing that with Munchkin and Wakid for me, they played well, but they didn't start fights. They didn't make the huge plays to win you a fight. They just kind of like did their thing within a fight, and they kind of relied on Fleta to do something. And when he wasn't able to do something, or when he was really focused on, then Seoul really had troubles attacking and engaging in fights and just being effective as a team. So we'll have to see. I think that though, oh boy, they could very easily throw themselves into the top three with right up there with London if all goes well, and if the coaches do a good job of getting the chemistry down between all these guys. And they have a couple months before the preseason starts, so this is a very, very good trade for Seoul. If you're a Dynasty fan, you got to be thrilled at this acquisition. And yeah, I think they're definitely gonna make a return to the playoffs, unless I don't know, unless really unforeseen things happen. And as a side note, it's kind of a farewell and a goodbye to Miro, the previous main tank of the Dynasty. I think at this point he's basically permabenched. I wouldn't be shocked if he retired. I wouldn't be shocked if he just stayed on the bench the whole season. I think the only chance that he plays is if like he gets released and he goes to an expansion team and just kind of starts fresh. But for those of you who don't know, Miro was like the Winston. He's what so many of the Winstons now, like Fissure and a whole bunch of the other ones. I think OGE was like this too. But a lot of the Winstons in the league now, and a lot of the Winstons that are trying to get into the league, they aspired to be Miro. They watched him, and he was the man on the hero. Best Winston in the history of Overwatch. Obviously, it's not the case anymore. We'll have to see if maybe he leaves and maybe he gets his mojo back and maybe he has a very good season 2. But this could very well be the end of him. And yeah, for me, he was the first Winston that I saw, because when I first got the game, it was like, oh, Winston, super low skill hero. You just jump in, you zap some people a little bit, you throw it on your bubble, and you let your team do the work. Well, for me, he was kind of the guy that showed me as, no, Winston is so much more than that. And I play a lot of Winston now. I love him as a character. So, and I pretty much have Miro to thank for that. So yeah, it's sad to see him potentially go, but that's how it goes. That's how it goes in sports, and esports are no different. When your performance dips, it doesn't matter what you've done in the past. All that matters is what you're doing now. So that's about it for what it's going to do for the Dynasty. Like I said, great move for them. Their organization fans should be clapping for them, because that was a very, very good deal. And then for the Gladiators, like I said, I don't think this is obviously a blow, but I think it was inevitable. It didn't surprise me. It didn't surprise me a whole lot when it went down. So now they turn to we got to find a new main tank. Unless they want to go with iRemix, unless they want him to be the starter, I kind of don't think that'll be the case. He did play well. You could tell that he had picked some stuff from Fissure and improved throughout the season, because I thought he played well against London in the playoffs, but it just wasn't enough. I think he's not aggressive enough, at least in like the meta of season 1. Maybe season 2 will be different. Maybe Hammond will be very good. Maybe Reinhardt will be used way more than Winston, so then that might change some things. But I do think they definitely need to bring in another main tank to at least like have competition between the two, because they are down to only one on the team now. So there's a couple options that I thought of off the top of my head. Obviously, I don't know all the good players out there. They're probably not going to want to get someone else from like the Korean ladder. You don't want that. You want someone who speaks English, who can kind of blend in with a team like that, so then Bishu doesn't have to worry about translating. And then I'm sure they'll probably let Asher go. It wouldn't make a whole lot of sense to keep him on. Maybe the same thing for Void. We'll see what happens with him. But then, yeah, maybe you look at grabbing a couple of backup supports just in case anything would happen with Big Goose or Shaz. But I think they definitely should remain as your starters. But for the main tank fix, I thought of 2 names off the top of my head. The first one would be Panker. And for those of you who don't know him, he plays in Overwatch Contenders, which is, of course, like it's like for baseball, you got the MLB, and then you have your AAA. like your minor league players who are very good, but they're like not quite good enough to get into the league yet. So they're like practicing, they're trying to get better, and they're trying to show the Overwatch League teams that, hey, we're good enough. So the Gladiators have like an affiliate, and it's called the Gladiators Legion, and they play in the contender circuit. They're a good team, but probably their best player is their main tank. His name, or his gamer tag, is Panker, and he's an extremely good Winston. Probably most people consider him to be one of the, if not the best, Winston player in North American contenders. Of course, there's a North American, you have South American contenders as well, you have Korean contenders, EU, Australia, but he's considered to be, in all of contenders, one of the best Winstons. One of the drawbacks to him, he hasn't obviously he hasn't played in Overwatch League, but with availability of players, the chances that they get somebody who's played in the league are very low. So I think Panker would be a very good option. He's like already technically in the organization. Extremely good at Winston. He's played some Hammond since he came out on the patch like a couple weeks ago, and he seems to be very good at Hammond as well. I think his Reinhardt would definitely need some work. That's probably his weakest hero of the ones that he plays. Same thing with Orisa. I could probably use some fine tunes there, but he's probably the safest option. That's the one that most people have said, like, oh, get Panker, makes sense, bring him up. And I'd be cool with that. Have him and iRemix be scrimming and subbing in and out and see who's a better fit for the team. And then the other one that came to my mind when I first thought of it was kind of a joke, but then I thought about it and I was like, huh. And that is XQC. So I'm sure you know who XQC is. Former main tank for the Dallas Fuel. Has had a lot of issues being suspended, either just from the game for being reported, or he was suspended multiple times in Overwatch League, and that is why he was dropped, because you can't really have a player in your team when he's barely going to be around and he's getting suspended all the time. But if this is a big if, I don't even think XQC will return to Overwatch League at any point. I think he's going to just be good streaming, but if you really think about it, for the Gladiators, he'd be a good fit because he speaks English. He already has pretty good relationships with some of the players, including probably Surefour the most. They're both Canadian. They've played on the World Cup team with each other multiple times. They're friends. So, like I said, he's fluent in English. He's very good. He's got the experience. So if he could just kind of keep his head down and stay out of trouble and just play for him, that could be a very scary addition. But like I said, I don't think that's going to happen, because just his past history with the Overwatch League, and he might not even be eligible for a while, so the Gladiators might not want that as kind of looming. But that is the other one that popped into my head, oh man, that would be fun. He's certainly he's an interesting fellow, and obviously a lot of people love him. He's got a huge stream. A lot of people hate him, so Gladiators probably won't want to bring that on, and he probably doesn't want to go back to the league because of how they kind of screwed him over. So he'll probably just stay to streaming. But in the back of your minds, that would be a crazy one. Absolutely crazy. But maybe they'll trade for another player. Who knows? Maybe they'll grab a backup from some other team. Time will tell. I'm just glad that there's finally a huge off-season move. Maybe now that that's happened, some more pieces will start turning. Some teams will start releasing players and trading them and signing new guys. So I'm excited for that. I'll make a video, another one, very shortly if anything like that happens. And then I'll probably have one coming out soon talking about some of the World Cup things. The South Korean portion has already concluded. South Korea and Finland moved on from that. And in a couple of weeks, on the 7th of September, the U.S. Group will play. So do some previews for that, talk about who's going to be moving on, and there were some very fun matches. So if you've been missing Overwatch lately, go back and look up those VODs for the South Korean group. South Korea versus Finland was a really good game. Finland versus Russia was a really good game. We had some entertaining stuff. So if you want to check those out, feel free. Some really good Overwatch, honestly, in those matchups. So that's going to do it for this video, though. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope you have a great couple of days. Let me know below who you think the Gladiators should pick up. What do you think? What are your expectations for Seoul now, moving forward? And I'll see you in the next video.